Welcome back. After leaving a State Department office vacant, President Obama has finally chosen someone, Clifford Sloan, a high-profile Washington lawyer, to be the State Department's special envoy for closing down the prison at Guantanamo. But the House has now voted overwhelmingly to once again block the president from closing Gitmo. Joining me now by phone from Guantanamo Bay is the most veteran of all Guantanamo reporters, the Miami Herald's Carol Rosenberg. Carol, what is the situation down there? Are the prisoners still, the detainees still on hunger strike, still in isolation? And will it make any difference now that Cliff Sloan has been appointed?
Yes, Andrea, there's still 104 of the 166 detainees on hunger strike. As of this morning, Navy troops are tube feeding, or as the president calls it, force feeding 44 of the hunger striking detainees. They've been on strike for about 4 months. And first thing we learned today at the hearing with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is that the 9/11 accused are not on a hunger strike. They look fit. They look like they're eating. And, in fact, we're in a lunch recess where they've been given an opportunity to pray and have lunch. As for Clifford Sloan, I have to tell you it was a bit of a surprise. People down here didn't immediately recognize his name, and we know, as established, he's not a career diplomat. So it looks like this is a choice to lobby the Hill on reducing restrictions. If you recall, the last person who had this job was a career diplomat, and his focus was lobbying Europe primarily to resettle detainees that were cleared through the process. Now the process is stalled. Congress has imposed restrictions, and it looks like Cliff Sloan's the man to go up to the Hill to try to persuade them to let them start reducing the population through transfers one at a time to countries that are willing to resettle the men that were cleared for release in 2010. Andrea?
You know, I'm fascinated by whatever interaction there might have been. Under what conditions does Khalid Sheikh Mohammed appear in the courtroom? Is he in isolation? Is there sort of an Eichmann glass box around him? Or does he actually sit in the courtroom? And are you able to sit there and watch this man?
Well, just the opposite. He sits inside this maximum security courtroom with his 4 defendants, each one in a chair, unshackled, next to their defense lawyers, military and civilian. And there are guards lining the walls, but he's allowed to sit there like any other defendant. We, the media, and the public come down here, including victims. For example, New York City firefighters sit inside a glass room with a 40-second delay. We hear what goes on in court 40 seconds after it's said, in case Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or any of the other men describe what happened to them, where they were held, how they were interrogated. In the 4 years they were held by the CIA before they got to Guantanamo in 2006. They look like ordinary defendants with one key exception. They are allowed to choose their attire. And today, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and another of the defendants came to court in paramilitary attire, a courtesy the judge, an Army colonel, allowed them. He was wearing a woodland pattern camouflage jacket over his more traditional white clothes and had a turban on his head. Behind him, the accused Walid bin Attash was wearing Navy desert camouflage. It's quite a sight because these are the men that are accused of putting together the plot of the September 11th attacks, and they want to be considered as soldiers, paramilitary, just like everyone else in court, the prosecution, the defense lawyers, the judge. And this is a courtesy the judge has allowed them at this point during the pretrial hearings. The prosecution opposed it. The prison didn't like it. The defense attorney said they should be allowed to wear the attire of their choice as they appear in these pretrial hearings before a panel of military officers comes as the tribunal that will ultimately judge them. Probably a trial that won't start until at the earliest late next year.
Carol, briefly, did you get any reaction afterwards from the New York City firefighters or some of the other victims who were down there?
We saw them last night. I haven't seen them this morning. And it's a very emotional group. They have a hard time understanding how U.S. military officers could be defending these men. And a lot of them have waited, as they've said, 12 long years for this moment, and they know the trial is not for a long time to come. So it's an emotional visit.
There's also was a closed session on the USS Cole. Can you brief us on that?
Yes. Last week was the first closed session where there were arguments and a hearing in a motion that's so secret it has no name. The lawyers went in for the defense and the prosecution. Not only were we, the public, excluded from whatever the national security that was held, but the USS Cole defendant, the alleged bomber, was told he couldn't hear whatever the argument was in his death penalty case. It lasted 7 to 8 minutes, and we don't even know if a witness was called. It was that secretive.
Carol Rosenberg, thank you so much for the report from Guantanamo.